didn't begin with a gunshot, nor with a loud protest on the streets. It all started with a single dossier. Heavy, thick, its cover stamped with two words so cold they plunged the entire security chamber into silence. Future Treaty. This was no rumor, no hypothesis. This was evidence, an architectural blueprint for control. Inside was no plan to save lives, no cure for disease, but the schematic of an invisible cage. Every line of text, a fresh shackle. Who authored it? Not doctors, not researchers, but Davos, the WHO, and the billionaires long accustomed to shaping world order through money and influence. Gates, Soros, Schwab. Names that, once spoken, thickened the air into suffocating weight. That dossier was not mere paperwork. It was heavier than any weapon, because within its pages lay the destiny of an entire nation. One question thundered. Would Burkina Faso see through it in time, before the chains locked all of Africa? Morning of August 15th, inside the National Security Headquarters in Ouagadougou, dim light flickered from the giant screens. The air was so dense, so heavy that every breath sounded like a warning drum. Security officers sat frozen, eyes locked on the file just placed on the table. On the screen, each page came into sharp focus. The bold red seal, classified, the chilling title, Future Treaty. Each line trembled under the fluorescent glare, whispering a death sentence. The draft was not written in Burkina Faso's halls of power, but far away in Davos, where the wealthy self-proclaimed global architects redraw the world map as they please. Familiar names appeared. The World Health Organization, once praised as humanity's guardian of health, but here they did not appear as doctors. They stood as wardens, preparing to imprison nations. Along the margins, colder names still, Bill Gates, George Soros, Klaus Schwab. None of them citizens of Burkina Faso, yet every word they endorsed determined the fate of millions. The most terrifying part. On the surface, the treaty spoke of medical cooperation, of safety, of human solidarity. But in the fine print of the annexes, another truth emerged. National Health Authority handed over to Geneva. Biological data forced into storage at foreign private centers. Governments compelled to bow before a so-called global emergency mechanism. This was not health policy. This was a blueprint for dependency, a meticulous plan to turn sovereignty into a mirage and Africa into a laboratory. As each page turned, the truth sharpened into focus. It was not a treaty on public health, but a recolonization plan stamped with a medical seal. The familiar names returned like ghosts. William Henry Bill Gates, the self-styled philanthropist standing behind global vaccine control. George Soros, the financial titan who could shake economies with a flick of his finger. And Klaus Schwab, founder of the World Economic Forum and father of the chilling slogan, The Great Reset. The first clause seemed harmless enough, strengthening global health cooperation. But on closer inspection, the fine print revealed all national emergency health powers would be transferred to the WHO in Geneva, which meant a single declaration from Europe could force Burkina Faso to close its borders, shut down its economy, or impose mandatory vaccinations, without Parliament's approval, without the people's consent. Clause 2. All biological data and citizens' DNA must be stored in an authorized international facility. Behind that polished phrase lies the reality. Personal information, the health records of millions of Africans, placed in the hands of Western tech corporations, easily weaponized into tools of surveillance and experimentation. Clause 3. The establishment of a global digital payment system linked to health profiles. This means every purchase, every salary, every meal could be frozen with a single command from Davos. Finance would no longer be a tool for development, but an invisible chain. And the ultimate purpose? Not to cure disease, not to safeguard humanity. It was all a facade. Behind the promises of safety and solidarity lurked the design to turn Africa into a perpetual laboratory, a captive market, and a continent under supervision. Before these words, the truth stood naked. The future treaty does not save lives. It kills freedom. As the treaty froze on the screen, President Ibrahim Traoré's voice cut through the suffocating air. Short, cold, Open an investigation. Immediately. Minutes later, Ouagadougou shook. Armored vehicles and special units spread across the city. The list of targets was clear, those believed to be the links between Davos and Burkina Faso's political arena. The first, former Health Minister Salifou Nabai. Once hailed by the West as a symbol of international cooperation. He was arrested at his suburban villa, where police uncovered contracts signed with foreign charitable organizations, alongside bank accounts in Luxembourg. Next, two powerful businessmen, Mohamed Ouaru and Isaka Traore. In public, they posed as infrastructure developers, but in the classified files, their true faces emerged. Intermediaries laundering aid money, funneling cash from Geneva back into Burkina Faso, disguised as cooperation projects. The raid on their offices exposed suitcases stuffed with cash and a trail of transfers snaking through Swiss banks. The final target, retired General Boubacar Idrissa Zongo, a familiar face at military conferences in Geneva. Inside his safe, security forces discovered an encrypted hard drive. Hours of decryption led to a shattering moment, direct emails from Davos. One was read aloud to the entire security team. By signing the future treaty, you will be guaranteed a seat on the Regional Executive Council. National interest may be sacrificed, but personal benefits will be secured. The room fell silent. No one spoke another word. The evidence was undeniable. Betrayal bought with seats and privileges. Under harsh lights, businessman Mohamed Ouaru was the first to break an interrogation. His voice trembled. They told us we were only signing a health agreement. Then, they promised to fund our projects. They called it a cooperation reward. Traore replied, each word a blade of ice. A reward? No. That was the price of betrayal. From that moment, the struggle was no longer hypothetical. It had become a manhunt for traitors. A surgical strike to sever the hand of Davos reaching into the heart of Burkina Faso. That afternoon, Independence Square overflowed with people. No tanks, no marching battalions. On the high podium stood only one man in a plain military uniform. In front of him lay the thick stack of documents seized from the raids. On the cover, trembling words, Future Treaty. President Ibrahim Traoré lifted one dossier. He raised it before the cameras, eyes locked straight into the millions watching through the lens. His voice resonated low, slow, but sharp as a blade. This is not paperwork. This is a death sentence for national sovereignty. They don't need to fire a bullet. They don't need to send an army. With just a few signatures, they sold Burkina Faso to Davos. The crowd froze. Only the pounding of hearts could be heard. Then Traoré continued, his voice stronger. They call this health. I call it chains. They call this cooperation. I call it surrender. They call this the future. I will say it plainly. It is enslavement. Those words tore through the fog of lies. Murmurs rippled until from one corner of the square, a shout erupted. No Davos! No reset! Within seconds, thousands of voices fused into a roaring wave. Traoré raised his hand to steady them, then lowered his voice. Slow, deliberate, every word nailed in place. My people, you have seen it with your own eyes. This is the deception called the Future Treaty. In truth, it is a blueprint to strip us of sovereignty, to turn Burkina Faso into an experiment, to sacrifice our children. But I swear to you, under this leadership, not a single line here will hold any value. We will not sign. We will not bow. And we will never surrender our destiny. The declaration struck like thunder. The crowd erupted into a deafening chant. Freedom, sovereignty, long live Burkina Faso. In that moment, the struggle was no longer the government's alone. It became the uprising of an entire people. Just hours after the speech, shock waves from Ouagadougou crossed borders. In Bamako, thousands of Malians flooded the streets, holding banners. No Davos, no chains. In Niamey, Nigerian youth planted AES flags beside Traoré's image, shouting, "One continent, one struggle." From Conakry to Dakar, drums, chants, and flames of resistance spread like a storm. Meanwhile, in the West, capitals shook. In Washington, a White House spokesperson told the press, The accusations by the Traore government are false and dangerous. Burkina Faso will face severe consequences if it continues down this path. In Brussels, EU officials declared bluntly, cooperation with a government defying international order is impossible. Paris, more heated, labeled Traoré an extremist and immediately recalled its ambassador. Mainstream media unleashed a coordinated barrage. On CNN, BBC, and France 24, Traoré's image was distorted, branded as a regional instability threat. But online, another story ignited. The clip of him tearing the dossier, his declaration, "They call this health, I call it enslavement," spread like wildfire. The hashtag Nasher Future of Freedom exploded from Lagos to Johannesburg, from Nairobi to Cairo. A Nigerian student wrote, "Yesterday they called Sankara a rebel. Today they called Traoré an extremist. But history will call them liberators." In Moscow, the Russian foreign minister declared, "Burkina Faso speaks the truth that many nations have not yet dared to voice." Beijing responded, "National sovereignty is inviolable." In Caracas, under Maduro, the statement rang out, "Brother Traoré is the torch of the global South." And in Tehran, the parliament rose to its feet in applause, calling Burkina Faso the front line against soft colonialism. In the corridors of global power, the truth was undeniable. The world had split in two. On one side, Davos, the G7, and the multinational giants. On the other, the small but unyielding nations, the peoples once plundered, who now lived without fear. In Ouagadougou, Traoré quietly listened as his advisor reported, "Mr. President, they will strangle us with sanctions, with media attacks, with diplomatic isolation." He clenched his fist, his voice deep but resolute. "If the price of freedom is isolation, then we will turn isolation into our banner. For there are no chains large enough to bind a continent that has awakened." On the third day after the dossier was exposed, Independence Square in Ouagadougou had no space left. A sea of people surged forward, carrying drums, flags, and earth-shaking chants. Above, drones broadcast live as the entire world watched. At the center stood a makeshift wooden stage. Upon it, President Ibrahim Traoré stood silent, holding the infamous file, Future Treaty. No army behind him, no iron barricades, only the people surrounding him. Traoré lifted the file high, then spoke, voice deep, ringing with defiance. "They call this protecting health. I call it chains. They call this cooperation. I call it surrender. They call this the future. I call it enslavement." And with that, he tore the first page. The sound of ripping paper echoed like thunder. The crowd erupted. The second page, the third, the fourth. Each sheet fell like a broken shackle. When the last page was torn, Traoré threw the remains into a steel drum placed in the center of the square. Flames erupted, blazing red into the night sky. Tens of thousands roared as one. "No Davos, no reset. Freedom for Africa." But the ritual did not end there. An elderly craftsman stepped forward, taking ashes from the fire and mixing them with clay. Right there before the people, he shaped a small bell. The crowd fell silent, watching every movement. When the clay hardened, Traoré lifted it, the fire's glow reflecting across his unyielding face. "This is the first Liberty Bell of Burkina Faso. It will hang in the school we build from this will, and when it rings, the world will know Africa has awakened." The bell's sound rang out, carrying across the square. People wept, embraced, and fell to their knees. Drums merged with cheers, transforming that night into a founding rite for a new era. The image spread instantly across the continent. In Bamako, Malians flooded the streets holding banners. No treaty, only freedom. In Niamey, Sahel drums thundered, "Long live AES." In Conakry, students sang the national anthem beneath the flag of Burkina Faso. The halls of power in Paris, Brussels, and Washington trembled as they watched the screens. A treaty once thought certain was now torn apart in the middle of a public square. Not with weapons, not with armies, but with a symbolic act, burning the treaty and forging a Liberty Bell. In that moment, the whole world understood. The struggle was no longer hidden. It had erupted into the open flame of a people rising, and that flame no force could extinguish. When the fire died down, the Liberty Bell had hardened in President Traoré's hand. He lifted it high, its ring carrying farther than the concrete walls of Independence Square. In that instant, all understood. This was not just clay. It was the soul of a nation that had just broken its chains. The bell's sound did not stop in Ouagadougou. It crossed the Niger River, swept through the Sahara, echoed in the alleys of Bamako, Niamey, Conakry, Dakar. Farmers looked up from their rice fields. Students wept in classrooms. Border soldiers gripped their rifles tighter. Each one heard in its echo a reminder. Sovereignty is not a gift to be given away. It is a birthright to be defended with blood and courage. In Johannesburg, a journalist wrote, "That bell does not ring for Burkina Faso alone. It rings for all of Africa." In Caracas, they called it the Bell of the South. In Tehran, clerics described it as the call of the oppressed world. And in New York, inside the UN headquarters, the image of Traoré holding the small bell flashed across the giant screen, stirring the entire assembly. The Liberty Bell had become a symbol of awakening. It spoke for millions who had no chance to speak. It proved that resistance does not always need bullets. Sometimes a single symbolic act is enough to shatter the illusion of power. The message spread. They call it protection. We call it chains. They call it reset. We call it recolonization. But from today, Africa will call it liberation. From the flames that burned the treaty, from the ashes shaped into a bell, one truth shone clear. Empires may write documents, may set traps, but they cannot shackle the will of an awakened people. And as Traoré declared before the sea of humanity, when this bell rings, it does not ring only for Burkina Faso. It rings for Mali, for Niger, for Guinea, for all who have been oppressed. It rings for a continent no longer for sale. And once the bell of freedom tolls, no empire will ever silence us again. The response thundered back like storm clouds. Freedom or nothing. That night, Ouagadougou shook not with gunfire, but with the sound of Africa's first Liberty Bell. As its echoes lingered in the Ouagadougou sky, one truth became undeniable. This struggle was not confined to Burkina Faso. It lived in every distorted headline, in every hidden signature beneath a treaty, in every sanction imposed on a people simply for saying no. Today, war is not fought only with bullets. It is waged on television, across social media, in every conversation you and I are having. The enemy does not only want land or resources. They want to conquer will, suffocate truth, and turn voices of resistance into faint whispers in the desert. But here, in this moment, we have seen one thing. The truth can still spread if there are people willing to light the flame. This is not just a YouTube channel. This is the front line of the information war. Every view, every share, every comment is a hammer strike against the chains they are forging. Do not dismiss it as small. History has never been written by cannons alone. It has also been written by whispers that grew into roars. Remember this. When one nation breaks a chain, the others begin to shake. Burkina Faso fights today not only for itself, but for all of Africa and beyond, for all who dream of a world unshackled. And now I speak to you, the one watching this video. Do not let this flame be extinguished. Subscribe, share, spread it. Because in this battle, a single click is not just a click. It is a strike against the wall of lies. A comment is not just words. It is proof we are not silent. The empire wants us to believe it is invincible. But every share, every chant online, every small act of yours is living proof. They are wrong. Stand with us. Let the Liberty Bell ring not only in Ouagadougou, but in your heart, your home, and across the world. Africa is not for sale. Freedom is not for negotiation. And the future will be written by us.